Hey guys, it's me, Seren, back with another video, and today's hidden figure is Susie King Taylor, who was the first Black Army nurse. So, my friend Adam, who's Prime Discussion, he's at Prime Discussion on Instagram, he's at Prime Discussion on Twitter, he's probably at Prime Discussion, everywhere, all over the fucking interwebs, the social medias or whatever. He's been doing daily posts for Black History Month, not on Black women specifically, but just like daily posts on, really interesting Black figures throughout history. And he has been doing a lot of posts on Black women, and it's funny because we were actually kind of talking and commiserating about how it can be really difficult to find information on Black women specifically, due to the fact that 9 times out of 10 when we talk about, Black people and Black History Month, a lot of the focus tends to be on men, due to the fact that we live in, a patriarchy and a sexist society. And then when we talk about the contributions of women throughout history, it tends to focus on white women because we live in a racist, white supremacist society. So it can be really hard to find information on Black women specifically because, women are white and the Blacks are men. So he actually did a post on Susie King Taylor, which I had never heard of her, and I wanted to do some more reading and some more research on her, and I decided to make her a hidden figure. So Susie King Taylor was born August 6th, 1848, and died October 6th, 1912. She was the first Black Army nurse, and she tended to an all-Black Army troop named the 1st South Carolina Volunteers Union, later redesignated the 33rd United States Colored Infantry Regiment, where her husband served, or Regiment, where her husband served for 4 years during the Civil War. Despite her service, like many African American nurses, she was never paid for her work. As the author of Reminiscences of My Life in Camp with the 33rd United States Colored Troops, she was the only African American woman to publish a memoir of her wartime experiences. She was also the first African American to teach openly in a school for former slaves in Georgia. At this school in Savannah, Georgia, she taught children during the day and adults at night. She is in the 2018 class of inductees of the Georgia Women of Achievement. And for anyone wondering, my friend Adam is from Georgia, so I'm sure that's probably how he even heard of Susie King Taylor. Susie King Taylor was born a slave at a plantation in Liberty County, Georgia on August 6, 1848, as Susan Ann Baker. When she was about 7 years old, her owner allowed her to go to Savannah to live with her grandmother, Dolly. Despite Georgia's harsh laws against the formal education of African Americans, Dolly, with whom Taylor lived for much of her childhood, supported Taylor's education by sending her to an illegal school run by a free African American woman named Mrs. Woodhouse. After learning all she could from Mrs. Woodhouse, Taylor continued her education under the tutelage of various teachers, including playmates and the son of her grandmother's landlord. Her education ended when she was forced to return to her mother after her grandmother Dolly was arrested at a suburban church meeting for singing freedom hymns. After the outbreak of the Civil War, Taylor moved to Fort Pulaski with her mother, yet the Union took the fort not long after, and Taylor fled with her uncle and his family to St. Catherine's Island. While there, they received Union protection, and Taylor impressed the commanding officers with her ability to read and write. In April 1862, Susie and many other African Americans fled to St. Simon's Island, occupied at the time by Union forces. Within days, her educational advantages came to the attention of Army officers who offered to obtain books for her if she would organize a school for children and adults on the island. She thereby became the first Black teacher for freed African American students to work in a freely operating freedmen's school in Georgia. She taught 40 children in day school and wrote in her memoirs of teaching a number of adults, this is a direct quote, a number of adults who came to me at nights, all of them so eager to learn to read above anything else. She taught there until October 1862 when the island was evacuated. While at the school on St. Simon's Island, Baker married Edward King, a Black non-commissioned officer in the 1st South Carolina Volunteers of African descent, later reflagged as the 33rd United States Colored Troops. For 3 years, she moved with her husband's regiment, serving as the first African-American Army nurse and laundress, and teaching many of the Black soldiers to read and write during their off-duty hours. In 1866, she and Edward returned to Savannah, where she established a school for freed children. Edward King died in September 1866, a few months before the birth of their first child. In 1867, she returned to her native Liberty County to establish another school, and in 1868, she again relocated to Savannah, where she continued teaching freedmen for another year and supported herself through small tuition charges. In the 1870s, she traveled to Boston as a domestic servant of a wealthy white family. While there, she met Russell L. Taylor, also a native of Georgia, and she returned home to Liberty County to marry Taylor on April 20th, 1879. The couple returned to Boston after marrying, and she would remain there for the rest of her life, returning to the South only occasionally. Taylor still kept in contact with her fellow veterans group, the Grand Army of the Republic, and after a trip to Louisiana in the 1890s to care for a dying son, she wrote her memoir titled Reminiscences of My Life in Camp with the 33rd United States Colored Troops, which were privately published in 1902. She died 10 years later and is buried next to her second husband at Mount Hope Cemetery in Roslindale, Massachusetts. And I'm going to include a ton of links. There's actually quite a bit of information out there on this woman. You had to dig, but I found like a lot of really, really interesting articles and a lot of academic and studies and journals on her. And I'm going to read you guys a blurb from one. This is going to be the very first link in the description box. Near the end of her memoir is a section titled Thoughts on Present Conditions. Taylor meditates on race relations after the war, and she writes, so this is a direct quote, "I wonder if our white fellow men realize the true sense or meaning of brotherhood. In this land of the free, we are burned, tortured, and denied a fair trial, murdered for any imaginary wrong conceived in the brain of the Negro-hating white man." In these musings is the essence and the necessity of Taylor's work. While other female memoirists offer unforeseen insight into the world of gender and the war, they cannot capture the intersectional reality of being both an African American and a woman in the South during the war. Taylor captures the hope of freedom, the horror of destruction, and the reality of racist institutions that would continue to plague the country. Susie King Taylor, A Hidden Figure. Food for thought as always. Great links in the description box. Please check them out. See you guys next time. Peace.